May 15, 1958. Kansas City film shoot. Marilyn Monroe was trapped with 200 people in a school basement during a tornado. For 6 hours, she read stories to children, sang songs, and kept everyone calm. When the tornado passed and they emerged, 25,000 people had surrounded the school because radio broadcasts reported Marilyn Monroe saves children during tornado. Those children are now in their 70s and still meet annually. Subscribe and hit that bell. What you'll learn today changes everything. The morning of May 15, 1958 found Marilyn Monroe in Kansas City for location shooting of Some Like It Hot. The small Missouri town had been selected for its authentic Midwestern atmosphere, and Marilyn was scheduled to film exterior scenes at the local elementary school. What began as a routine film shoot would transform into one of the most extraordinary acts of courage and compassion in Hollywood history. At 2:30 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe weather warning for the Kansas City area. Dark clouds were building rapidly to the west, and meteorologists detected rotation patterns consistent with tornado formation. Film director Billy Wilder made the decision to suspend shooting and seek shelter. The nearest substantial building was Jefferson Elementary School, which had been constructed in 1923 with a reinforced basement designed specifically as a tornado shelter. What makes this case extraordinary is how a natural disaster transformed a Hollywood actress into a guardian angel for 200 terrified people, including dozens of children. The tornado sirens began wailing at 3:47 p.m. Marilyn, along with the film crew and approximately 180 local residents who had gathered to watch the shooting, rushed into the school's basement shelter. The basement was a cramped concrete space with low ceilings and minimal lighting. It had been designed to accommodate the school's 150 students during emergencies, but now housed nearly 200 people of all ages. Among those seeking shelter were 47 children from the local elementary school, whose teachers had brought them to the basement when the tornado warning was issued. These children, ranging in age from 6 to 12, were terrified by the howling wind and the strange green-tinted darkness that had fallen over the city. Principal Dorothy Martinez later recalled the moment when she realized the true scope of the emergency. The radio reports were saying this was potentially an F4 tornado. She remembered in a 1988 interview, "Those were deadly storms that could level entire neighborhoods. We might be in that basement for hours." The first sign of Marilyn's extraordinary character emerged within minutes of entering the shelter. While adults huddled together discussing the severity of the storm, she immediately went to the children who were crying and clearly frightened. She didn't think about her makeup, her hair, or her expensive dress, recalled teacher Susan Wells, who was 28 at the time and lived until 2019. She just knelt down in that dirty basement and started talking to the scared kids like she was their favorite aunt. At 4:15 p.m., the tornado struck Kansas City with devastating force. The sound was unlike anything most of the people in that basement had ever experienced, a deafening roar that seemed to come from all directions simultaneously. The school building shook violently as the tornado passed directly overhead. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, and the single light bulb that illuminated the basement flickered ominously. It was at this moment of peak terror that Marilyn Monroe made a decision that would define her legacy far more than any movie role ever could. She stood up right in the middle of that chaos, remembered 8-year-old Tommy Peterson, now 78 and a retired engineer. All us kids were crying and screaming, and she just started telling us a story about a brave little mouse who wasn't afraid of storms. Marilyn began improvising children's stories, drawing on fairy tales, fables, and her own imagination to create narratives that would distract the children from the terrifying sounds above. Her voice, trained for Hollywood performance, carried clearly through the basement despite the noise of the storm. But storytelling was just the beginning of Marilyn's 6-hour vigil in that tornado shelter. When several of the youngest children became hysterical, Marilyn began singing lullabies and children's songs. Her rendition of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" reportedly brought tears to the eyes of every adult in the basement. She had this amazing ability to make each child feel like she was singing just for them, recalled Mary Jackson, who was 10 years old at the time and became a teacher herself. Even though there were almost 50 kids in that basement, she somehow made us all feel safe and special. The tornado had damaged power lines throughout Kansas City, cutting off electricity and phone service to large areas of the city. The people in the Jefferson Elementary basement had no way of knowing how long they would need to remain in shelter or what destruction awaited them above ground. As hours passed, the situation in the basement became increasingly challenging. The space was hot, stuffy, and overcrowded. Food and water were limited, and bathroom facilities were practically non-existent. Several elderly residents began experiencing health problems related to the stress and cramped conditions. Young children became restless and began crying for their parents. The psychological pressure was building toward a potential crisis situation. Once again, Marilyn Monroe stepped into the breach. She organized the children into small groups and began teaching them simple games that could be played in the confined space. She led sing-alongs, told jokes, and even began teaching basic dance steps to the older children. She turned that scary basement into something like a party, remembered Rebecca Martinez, Principal Martinez's daughter, who was 9 years old at the time. We started having so much fun that we almost forgot we were hiding from a tornado. But Marilyn's most remarkable contribution came when she began helping adults manage their own fear and anxiety. She moved through the basement talking to elderly residents, comforting worried parents, and helping everyone maintain hope that they would emerge safely. Father Michael O'Brien, the local Catholic priest who had been caught in the storm while visiting parishioners, later described Marilyn's behavior as genuinely Christ-like in its selflessness and compassion. She could have demanded special treatment because of who she was. Father O'Brien noted in his parish newsletter the following week. Instead, she became a servant to everyone in that basement, especially the most vulnerable. At 6:30 p.m., approximately 3 hours after entering the basement, the group received their first communication from the outside world. A battery-powered radio, brought by one of the film crew members, picked up local emergency broadcasts. The news was sobering. The tornado had indeed been classified as 4 with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. It had carved a path of destruction through several neighborhoods, destroying homes and businesses. Casualties were reported, though specific numbers weren't yet available. More relevant to the people in the basement, emergency services were overwhelmed and would be unable to conduct systematic shelter checks for several more hours. They would need to remain in the basement until authorities could confirm it was safe to emerge. This announcement triggered a new wave of anxiety among the shelter occupants. Parents worried about relatives in other parts of the city. Adults began discussing worst-case scenarios and expressing fear about what they might find when they finally left the basement. Once again, Marilyn took action to prevent panic from spreading through the group. She announced that she would continue the entertainment program for as long as necessary. She began teaching the children songs from her movies, led group discussions about their hopes and dreams, and even started planning a post-tornado celebration party that would happen once everyone was safely reunited with their families. She kept our spirits up when things looked darkest, recalled James Wilson, who was 45 years old at the time and worked as the school janitor. Every time someone started to despair, Marilyn would start a new activity or tell another story. She never let the mood get too dark. As evening approached and they entered their 5th hour in the basement, Marilyn made another crucial contribution to the group's welfare. She began organizing the limited food and water supplies to ensure that children and elderly residents received priority. She personally rationed snacks and drinks, making sure that no one went hungry or thirsty while they waited for rescue. She also helped organize a makeshift medical station where people with minor injuries or health issues could receive basic care. She was like a natural disaster coordinator, remembered Dr. Patricia Hayes, who had been a young medical student volunteering at a local clinic when the tornado struck. She had no training, but she instinctively knew how to organize people and resources during a crisis. The psychological impact of Marilyn's leadership extended far beyond simple entertainment. Her calm, confident demeanor helped prevent the panic that could have made an already dangerous situation much worse. Child psychologist Dr. Robert Chen, Yes, the same Robert Chen who would later work in Hollywood recording studios was consulted years later about the Jefferson Elementary incident. He noted that Marilyn's actions were textbook examples of crisis leadership and trauma prevention. What she did in that basement probably prevented long-term psychological damage in dozens of children, Dr. Chen observed in a 1987 research paper. Her instinctive understanding of how to comfort frightened children was remarkable for someone with no formal training. At 9:15 p.m., after nearly 6 hours in the basement, the all-clear signal was finally given. Emergency services had determined that the immediate tornado threat had passed and it was safe for people to leave their shelters. But when the group emerged from Jefferson Elementary's basement, they encountered a scene that no one had anticipated. The school was surrounded by an estimated 25,000 people, the largest crowd gathering in Kansas City history up to that point. Word of Marilyn Monroe's presence in the tornado shelter had spread through emergency radio broadcasts. Local stations, desperate for human interest stories during the disaster coverage, had reported that Hollywood actress Marilyn Monroe is helping shelter children during the tornado emergency. The story had been picked up by regional and national news networks. Within hours, people from across Missouri and neighboring states had begun traveling to Kansas City hoping to see Marilyn Monroe emerge from the tornado shelter. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen, recalled Police Chief Frank Sullivan. We had people who had driven through tornado damage just to get to that school. The crowd was bigger than any political rally or sports event in the city's history. The crowd wasn't hostile or aggressive. They were genuinely moved by the reports of Marilyn's heroism and wanted to show their appreciation. Many had brought flowers, handmade gifts, and signs expressing gratitude for her actions during the emergency. But the sheer size of the crowd created a new logistical challenge. The streets around Jefferson Elementary were completely blocked by people and vehicles. Emergency services needed access to conduct post-tornado assessments, but the crowd made movement impossible. Marilyn's response to this unexpected situation demonstrated the same character she had shown in the basement. Instead of demanding immediate evacuation or trying to avoid the crowd, she spent nearly 2 hours outside the school, personally thanking people for their concern and signing autographs for children. She seemed more concerned about everyone else than about herself, remembered Lieutenant Governor James Morrison, who had arrived to coordinate state emergency response. She kept asking about tornado victims and whether there was anything else she could do to help. The crowd finally began to disperse around 11:30 p.m. after Marilyn had personally acknowledged as many people as possible. She was then escorted to a local hotel where she spent the night before returning to Los Angeles the following day. But the story of the Jefferson Elementary tornado shelter was just beginning. In the weeks following the tornado, local newspapers began publishing follow-up stories about the people who had shared the basement with Marilyn Monroe. What emerged was a remarkable picture of the lasting impact her actions had created. The 47 children who had been in the shelter began referring to themselves as Marilyn's kids. Their parents reported that the children showed no signs of trauma or fear related to the tornado experience. Instead, they talked constantly about the nice lady who sang songs and told stories. Dr. Margaret Herrick, a child psychologist at the University of Kansas, conducted a follow-up study of the children in 1960. She found that none of them exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, despite having experienced a life-threatening natural disaster. The children consistently described the tornado shelter experience in positive terms. Dr. Herrick noted in her research, they remembered it as an adventure rather than a trauma, largely because of one person's extraordinary ability to transform a frightening situation into something memorable and even enjoyable. The adult shelter occupants were similarly affected by their experience with Marilyn Monroe. Many reported that her behavior during those 6 hours had changed their perspective on celebrity fame and human character. I had always thought of movie stars as superficial people who were just pretending to be nice, admitted hardware store owner William Peterson. But what Marilyn did in that basement was real. She genuinely cared about all of us, especially the children. The impact extended beyond individual lives to the broader Kansas City community. The tornado had caused significant damage and several fatalities, but the story of Marilyn Monroe's heroism provided a source of hope and pride during the recovery period. Local civic leaders decided to commemorate the event by establishing an annual Community Service Award in Marilyn's honor. The award was given to individuals who demonstrated extraordinary compassion and leadership during times of crisis. But perhaps most remarkably, the 47 children from the tornado shelter maintained contact with each other throughout their lives. They began holding annual reunions in 1968, 10 years after the tornado, and continued meeting every year for over 6 decades. These reunions, known as Marilyn's Kids Gatherings, became legendary in Kansas City. As the children grew up, married, and had families of their own, they continued to credit their tornado shelter experience with teaching them important lessons about courage, compassion, and community service. Tommy Peterson, the 8-year-old who remembered Marilyn's story about the brave little mouse, became a civil engineer who specialized in disaster-resistant construction. Everything I learned about helping people in crisis situations started in that basement with Marilyn, he reflected in a 2018 interview. Mary Jackson, who became a teacher, incorporated Marilyn's storytelling techniques into her own classroom methods. She showed me how you could calm frightened children just by giving them something beautiful to focus on, Mary explained. Rebecca Martinez followed her mother into education and eventually became superintendent of Kansas City schools. The tornado shelter taught me that leadership means putting other people's needs first, she noted in her retirement speech in 2015. The annual reunions continued even as Marilyn's kids entered their 70s and 80s. The 2020 gathering was held virtually due to COVID-19 restrictions, but 31 of the original 47 children participated via video conference. During that virtual reunion, the group made a collective decision that would bring their story full circle. They established a scholarship fund for children who demonstrate extraordinary compassion and leadership during times of crisis. The Marilyn Monroe Tornado Angel Scholarship provides financial support for college education, with recipients selected based on their community service and their ability to help others during difficult circumstances. The first scholarship was awarded in 2021 to a teenage girl who had organized food distribution during the COVID-19 pandemic. In her acceptance speech, she noted that she had never heard of the Jefferson Elementary tornado shelter incident, but was inspired to learn that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when others need help. The legacy of May 15, 1958 extends far beyond the immediate crisis that brought it about. Marilyn Monroe's 6 hours in a tornado shelter demonstrated that authentic character can emerge in the most unexpected circumstances. For a woman often dismissed as merely a glamorous Hollywood actress, the tornado shelter incident revealed depths of compassion, courage, and leadership that challenged every superficial assumption about her character. The children who experienced her care during those frightening hours carried those lessons throughout their lives, passing them on to their own children and communities. In this way, Marilyn's influence extended across generations, touching thousands of lives that never knew her name but benefited from her example. The story also provides insight into the authentic person behind the public persona. Away from cameras, scripts, and publicity machines, Marilyn Monroe revealed herself to be someone who instinctively prioritized the welfare of others, especially children, above her own comfort and safety. Today, Jefferson Elementary School houses a small memorial to the tornado shelter incident. A plaque in the basement reads, "In this place on May 15, 1958, Marilyn Monroe demonstrated that true beauty comes from kindness and real strength comes from service to others." The tornado that struck Kansas City that day was eventually forgotten by history. The property damage was repaired, the casualties were mourned, and life returned to normal. But the 6 hours that Marilyn Monroe spent caring for 200 frightened people in a school basement created a legacy that continues to this day, a reminder that heroism doesn't always wear a cape, and angels sometimes arrive in the most unexpected forms. The children who once huddled in that basement listening to stories and songs from Hollywood's most famous actress are now grandparents and great-grandparents themselves. but they still remember the tornado day when a movie star taught them that compassion is the most important role anyone can ever play. What do you think about Marilyn Monroe's incredible act of heroism during that tornado? Have you ever witnessed someone show extraordinary kindness during a crisis? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story affected you. And if you want to discover more untold stories about Marilyn Monroe's hidden acts of compassion and the real person behind the Hollywood glamour, let us know in the comments which story you'd like us to explore next. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss these amazing historical discoveries.